Hello everyone. Welcome everyone to the channel's Strange Night podcast. Story 1. The Obsession of the Sled. The twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota, are usually known for their peaceful beauty, clear lakes, and characteristic cold climate. But during the darkest years, that tranquility was torn apart by one name: Harvey Lewis Carignan, the man people chillingly called the werewolf of the Twin Cities. This is the story of a series of brutal crimes, a sick soul, and a justice system that horrifyingly failed by letting a monster roam free multiple times. Carignan's story began early, with clear evidence of a violent and deviant nature. As early as the 1940s, he was arrested and convicted for sexual assault of women in Washington. Later, he was convicted of murder in Alaska in 1949. One would think these actions would lock him away permanently, but Carignan possessed a frightening ability. He always found a way to escape or have his sentence reduced. He studied law in prison, manipulated loopholes, defended himself, and repeatedly caused juries and judges to doubt. This is the most disturbing point. Carignan was not just a killer. He was a master manipulator, a man who understood the law well enough to turn it into a tool for his own crimes. In the 1970s, true fear began to grip the Twin Cities. Carignan, now in Minnesota, lived a seemingly quiet life, but beneath that facade was an uncontrollable bloodlust. His victims were young women, often lured or abducted by him in the cold darkness of night. The most horrific case, and his final one, occurred in 1974. The victim was a young woman. The details of this case paint a picture of limitless brutality. After the act, Carignan committed an incredibly cold and bizarre act. He used an old sled, covered with a tarp, to transport the victim's body through the town. Against the backdrop of white snow and dark night, the image of a middle-aged man calmly pulling a sled containing his most terrible secret is utterly haunting. He buried the body in a vacant lot, attempting a flimsy cover-up of his crime. The young woman's disappearance triggered a large-scale investigation, and Carignan's name gradually surfaced. When investigators finally arrived at his residence, they found chilling evidence. Not only were there the victim's personal belongings, but also a trove of documents, diaries, and evidence suggesting he had not only killed this woman, but was also connected to many unsolved cases spanning decades. When police finally apprehended Carignan, the people of the Twin Cities truly realized the extent of the horror. For years, this serial killer had lived among them, walked the same streets, and even chatted with them. He exploited the shortcomings of the legal system, using his legal knowledge as a shield, and systematically brought about death. At the trial, although he attempted to defend himself and complicate matters as he had in the past, the evidence was overwhelmingly clear this time. Harvey Lewis Carignan's life was a long chain of second, third, and fourth chances he was given, and each time he was released, a new crime occurred. Ultimately, he was convicted and received the punishment he deserved. But the legacy that this werewolf left behind is not just graves, but the haunting realization that a psychopath can lurk among us, exploiting the rules to continue preying. Carignan's story is a chilling reminder. Sometimes the real monster doesn't hide under the bed. It can be the friendly neighbor, or even someone the system mistakenly trusted to be free again. Harvey Lewis Carignan's crimes forced Minnesota and other states to reconsider rules regarding parole and sentence reduction for violent sexual offenders. But for the victims' families, that change came too late. The obsession of the sled carrying the victim's body remains an indelible dark stain on the history of the Twin Cities. Story 2. The Friendly Neighbor. In the history of American crime, there are killers who wear the face of brutality, but there are also those who wear the cloak of respectability, making them utterly unsuspected. John Edward Robinson is the embodiment of the latter. In the Kansas and Missouri area during the late 1990s, he was a father, a successful businessman, and even a beloved volunteer baseball coach. He was the friendly neighbor everyone trusted. But hidden beneath that smile was a sick predator, one of the first serial killers to fully utilize the nascent technology of the internet to carry out his crimes. In an era when the internet was still new and full of promise, Robinson turned online chat rooms and forums into his hunting grounds. He used compelling aliases, creating a facade of a wealthy man looking to help or seeking special relationships. His victims were often young, vulnerable women looking for financial support or a meaningful connection. Robinson lured them not only with promises, but also with fake business contracts or slavery contracts, demonstrating his cold calculation in controlling his victims. Robinson's cruelty did not stop at murder. He was a sadist and control freak. He held victims captive, subjected them to horrific torture, and even filmed his crimes. He called his storage facility the Dark Room, a place that witnessed unspeakable savagery. Victims were not only robbed of their lives, but also their dignity in their final moments. Robinson's downfall began when a relative of a missing victim became suspicious. After numerous attempts to search and trace digital footprints, the police obtained a warrant to search Robinson's properties. What they found was a terrifying discovery that went down in the history of American crime. At a seemingly innocuous storage unit in Kansas, police discovered 5 blue plastic barrels, carefully sealed. Inside those barrels were not chemicals or goods, but the decomposing bodies of his victims, submerged in a foul liquid. This discovery revealed a gruesome truth. The respectable man, the model father, had secretly stored the evidence of his murders for months, even years, right within the community. Subsequently, 2 more bodies were found on Robinson's property across the Missouri border. In total, police charged Robinson with the murder of at least 8 women, although the actual number of victims may be much higher. The case of John Edward Robinson was shocking, not only for its brutality, but also because it was one of the first clear demonstrations of how the internet could be used as a murder weapon. He manipulated the boundaries between the virtual and real worlds, exploiting anonymity and the trust of others to satisfy his darkest desires. In court, Robinson maintained a cold demeanor and pleaded not guilty. However, the evidence of the fake contracts, the online communications, and, most importantly, the barrels filled with bodies proved the undeniable crimes. This story of the friendly neighbor is a chilling reminder of the truth that evil often does not wear the face of a frightening vagrant. Sometimes it wears a nice suit, holds a baseball bat, and offers a warm smile. And that in the age of connectivity, the line between trust and danger can be thinner than ever. Story 3. The Horrifying Hotel. In 1893, Chicago was the center of global attention as it hosted the world's Columbian Exposition. Millions of visitors flocked to the city, seeking novelty, dazzling lights, and technological wonders. But hidden just miles away from the festivities was a chilling piece of architecture. a deadly labyrinth built by a man named Herman Webster Mudgett, who called himself Dr. Henry Howard Holmes. It was the Murder Castle. Holmes, a pharmacist and cunning swindler, built this 3-story structure not just for business, but for hunting. Outwardly, it was a typical hotel and commercial space, but inside was a terrifying design that only a sick mind could conceive. This episode will delve into the horror of the architecture itself. Holmes's hotel was a perfect trap. It contained over 100 rooms, but many were airtight chambers with no windows and doors that locked from the outside. Corridors twisted and suddenly ended at a brick wall. Staircases led to upper floors, then disappeared into thin air. The sole purpose of these designs was to disorient, isolate, and imprison unfortunate victims. One of the most gruesome details was the poison gas delivery system. Holmes had installed gas lines leading to certain selected bedrooms, allowing him, from his secret private room, to inject toxic gas to asphyxiate victims while they slept. After the victims died, Holmes didn't just dispose of the bodies. He profited from their deaths. He used secret trapdoors and chutes to slide the bodies down to the basement, which was equipped with a large crematory, vats of acid, and even a dissection table. Holmes had an extreme obsession with stripping the flesh and selling the human skeletons to medical schools. He had turned murder into a ghastly industry, a combination of boundless greed and a thirst for blood. Throughout the duration of the World's Fair, while the city was immersed in joy, Holmes lured and murdered countless visitors, especially young women. The exact number of Holmes's victims remains a mystery, ranging from 9 to over 200 people, making him one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. Holmes's downfall was not triggered by police pursuing a specific murder, but by his attempt to defraud an insurance company with a complex scheme involving the fake death of an associate. This led to a large-scale investigation that finally uncovered the full horror of the Murder Castle. When police searched the building after Holmes's arrest, they were shocked by the diabolical design inside. Investigators discovered traces of blood, human bones, and torture instruments, turning the place into physical evidence demonstrating the existence of pure evil. The story of H.H. Holmes is a chilling reminder that, in an era of innovation and progress, crime and savagery can also evolve. He was not an impulsive madman, but a calculating, organized killer who built an architectural masterpiece solely for his deadly purpose. The Murder Castle forever remains a terrifying symbol of human cunning and ultimate greed. Story 4. The Curse of the Highway. In 1946, as America was joyfully returning to normal life after the war, the small town of Texarkana, straddling the border of Texas and Arkansas, was plunged into a primal and inexplicable fear. This is not the story of a typical serial killer with a clear target, but about a phantom who appeared in the moonlight, committing brutal attacks and who was never caught. The first victims of the phantom killer were young couples attacked on Lover's Lane, the secluded highways where couples often park to spend time together. The first attack in late February foreshadowed a nightmare. Afterward, the attacks continued in a terrifying cycle. The killer had a mysterious appearance, often wearing a hood or a burlap mask, moving like a ghost in the dark. The horror of the Texarkana case lies not only in the brutal nature of the murders, but also in the randomness and the killer's lack of clear motive. The killer would typically approach the car, using a gun or knife to attack the couples. He left no significant clues, except for a pervasive fear that spread throughout the town. Local police, the FBI, and even the Texas Rangers were mobilized, but the Phantom always seemed to be one step ahead. One of the most haunting details of the case was the killer's shift in targets. Initially, he targeted couples, but later he broke into a farmhouse on the outskirts of town, killing a farmer and his wife right in their home. This showed that the killer was not restricted to a specific type of victim or location, further increasing the dread that anyone could be the next target. Texarkana was enveloped in darkness. After sunset, the streets became deserted. Residents bought weapons, locked their windows tight, and dances and dates were canceled. The town's atmosphere was choked by suspicion and fear. People did not know who the Phantom was. Was he a local resident, a passing stranger, or a true demon emerged from the shadows? The investigation did have suspects, including a man linked to car thefts, but the evidence was never sufficient for a conviction. After a final attack in early May 1946, the Phantom killer suddenly vanished from Texarkana, as if he had never existed. The Texarkana Moonlight Murders case has become a true urban legend, a horror story passed down through generations. It has inspired films and books, but for the people of Texarkana, it is a wound that never healed. They know the killer walked among them, and perhaps died of natural causes, taking his dark secret to the grave. This episode is not just about who was killed, but about how fear can invade and paralyze an entire community. The curse of the highway remains, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying horror story is the one that never has a clear ending, a name, or a face to put behind bars. Story 5. The Woman in the Box. In the history of crime, there are acts of evil so profound they defy human comprehension. The case of David Parker Ray, often referred to by the media as the Toy Box Killer, is a chilling testament to that truth. This man, operating in New Mexico, harbored a mind so twisted it is barely believable. This episode will focus on Ray's characteristic method of operation, the creation of a mobile torture chamber he called the Toy Box. It was an old travel trailer, converted into a specialized torture room, equipped with high-tech gear and dedicated surgical and torture instruments. The horror lies in the fact that this room was not just a place for physical agony, but also where he sought to destroy the victims' minds using recording devices that played his terrifying threats and gruesome rules. Ray did not work alone. He was aided by a woman named Cindy Hendy, sometimes incorrectly referred to as Janice Hooker in some documents. Note that Janice Hooker was an accomplice in a different case involving Cameron Ray. The correct name in this case is Cindy Hendy or Glenda Richter, but we will stick with Cindy Hendy to avoid confusion. Cindy, under Ray's manipulation and abuse, helped him lure and abduct victims. This case was exposed dramatically and accidentally in 1999 when a victim named Cynthia Vigil found an opportunity to escape. After being abducted and tortured by Ray, she managed to break free from his truck during a moment of inattention and fled to a nearby house for help. This escape story is the central point of tension in this episode, describing the victim's ultimate resilience. When police interrogated Cynthia Vigil, her testimony about an underground torture room, a metal box, and a man in leather gear forced investigators to confront a horrifying reality. When police searched Ray's property, they located the Toy Box trailer. Inside, they discovered a chilling truth. The trailer was filled with torture devices, video surveillance equipment, and gruesome audio tapes that Ray had used to record his rules and savage acts. These tapes were used as incriminating evidence, providing a cold, deep look into Ray's distorted mind and the sadistic acts he had committed against dozens, perhaps hundreds of victims over 2 decades. Although police did not find many bodies, the circumstantial evidence and the testimony of accomplices suggested that the scale of Ray's crimes was massive. He often used powerful sedatives and memory loss drugs, leaving many survivors unable to fully recall the details of the events, which further complicated the task of determining the number of victims. The David Parker Ray case is a terrifying story of absolute control, a killer who turned his dwelling into a torture laboratory. It serves as a stark warning about how a sick mind can use ingenuity and technology to create a living hell on Earth. Story 6. The Confession of the Wall Street Killer. This case is a dark story of betrayal and merciless greed, played out among the elite of New York. Theodore Ted Ammon was a successful financier, a Wall Street millionaire who had accumulated a massive fortune. His life with his wife, Generosa Ammon, outwardly appeared to be a perfect American dream, symbolized by their luxurious vacation home in East Hampton, an icon of wealth and achievement. However, behind the closed doors of the Hampton estate, the marriage was rotting. Generosa was a woman of volatile and demanding nature, while Ted was focused on his work. This rift led to a bitter divorce proceeding and a dispute over assets worth tens of millions of dollars. The tragedy occurred in October 2001. Ted Ammon was found brutally beaten to death in his vacation home. His death was determined to be the result of a savage beating. Immediately, the investigation became complex, revolving around assets, jealousy, and illicit relationships. The focus of the case quickly shifted to Generosa Ammon and her new lover, Daniel Pelosi, an electrician with a checkered past. Generosa and Pelosi began a romantic relationship right amid the contentious divorce proceedings with Ted. Pelosi, a man with a rough and aggressive demeanor, was allegedly used by Generosa to carry out violent acts and ultimately murder. This episode will delve into Pelosi's role. He was a man with a history of violence, and he had a clear motive. Generosa had promised him a substantial portion of the divorce settlement if he helped her eliminate Ted. The story becomes a classic crime drama. Misplaced love, money, and a secret agreement leading to homicide. Throughout the investigation, police faced silence and sophisticated concealment. Generosa Ammon suddenly died of cancer before the case went to trial, leaving Pelosi as the remaining main suspect. The final revelation came when forensic evidence and witness testimonies, including that of Pelosi's ex-wife, gradually pointed to his guilt. Daniel Pelosi was eventually charged and convicted for the murder of Ted Ammon. However, the most haunting aspect is Pelosi's confession. After his conviction, he attempted to mitigate his sentence by indirectly admitting to causing Ted's death, but insisted it was at Generosa's urging. This confession closed the case, confirming it was a premeditated crime, rooted in jealousy and insatiable greed during a bitter divorce. The Ted Ammon case is a cold look into the dark side of affluence. It shows how the most base human desires, jealousy, hatred, and greed, can infiltrate the highest echelons of society, and that a multi-million-dollar divorce can end not with a signature on paper, but with violence and death. Story 7. The Ghost in the White House. This is a horror story about invasion and protracted fear, a true account that drove an entire family into a living hell right inside their dream home. The case of the Watcher occurred in Westfield, New Jersey, an affluent, quiet suburb. In 2014, the Broaddus family purchased a beautiful Dutch colonial-style house, a $1.3 million property, and began renovations before moving in. This house was supposed to be a symbol of success and a fresh start. But just days after signing the contract, they received a letter. That letter was the beginning of the nightmare. The sender called himself the Watcher. The letter's content was not just vague threats, but contained disturbingly personal details about the house and the Broaddus family. Dearest new neighbor, the house has been the subject of my family for decades now. It is now my turn. I see you are making changes, doing renovations. Do you need to fill the walls with the blood of young children? Or simply bring me your young blood? The horror escalated as the letter mentioned their children by name, asked if they played in the basement, and specifically described details of the house, indicating that the Watcher must be someone living very close or someone with access to the property. This case is a prolonged psychological thriller. The Broaddus family continued to receive more letters, each one more terrifying than the last. They hinted that the house needed young blood and that the Watcher had been monitoring the house for 3 generations of his family, believing he had a rightful claim to it. Fear turned into paranoia. The Broaddus family never dared to fully move into the house. They feared every sound, suspected every neighbor, and were forced to live while paying for a home they couldn't inhabit. Police and the FBI became involved in the investigation, but were unable to determine the writer's identity. Language analysis experts tried to find clues, but the Watcher was too cunning. Potential suspects, from eccentric neighbors to former family members, were interviewed, but the case remains unsolved. This stalemate led the Broadduses to sue the former owners, alleging they concealed the truth about the Watcher before the sale. The prolonged legal battle and investigation exposed cracks in the Westfield community and how fear can destroy not just a single family, but also the trust of a neighborhood. This episode concludes with the painful truth. After years of legal struggle, attempting to sell the house at a loss, and enduring tremendous psychological pressure, the Broaddus family finally sold the house. But to this day, the identity of the Watcher remains an unsolved mystery. The story of the ghost in the White House didn't need a knife or a gun to instill terror. With just a pen and an envelope, the Watcher proved that the greatest fear sometimes comes from an invisible threat and the relentless feeling of being watched, turning a house into a psychological prison. Story 8. The Hand in the South. During the 1970s, San Francisco was a city undergoing immense social and cultural transformation, especially within the gay male community. This was an era of liberation, but also a time when stigma remained strong. It was in this complex environment that a serial killer emerged, known by the name the Doodler. The Doodler's case is particularly chilling because of his approach to victims. He targeted single gay men, often meeting them in bars or bathhouses in the Castro district and surrounding areas. After luring the victims to a secluded location, the Doodler would strike. The first victim was found in January 1974. This was followed by a horrific series of attacks and murders that lasted 2 years. The killer typically used a knife, inflicting brutal deaths. He was named the Doodler because, in some instances, he would quickly sketch the victim's face or make crude drawings on scraps of paper before or after the murder. These drawings became his ghoulish signature. However, what made this case tragic and unsolvable was the obstruction that came from the community itself. Although several witnesses survived the attacks and saw the Doodler, they hesitated to provide full testimony to the police. The reason lay in the profound fear of being publicly revealed, coming out, in a society still riddled with homophobia. At the time, having their identity exposed by the police or the press could ruin their careers and family lives. The reluctance of the witnesses severely hampered the San Francisco police investigation. Although the police knew a predator was operating within the community, they lacked sufficient legal evidence or full testimonies for a conviction. This episode will delve into that societal conflict. The doodler is a symbol of a crime that was not just personal, but systemic, a crime fostered by silence, fear, and the indifference of a segment of society toward the victim community. The police chief at the time even remarked that the victims were often the type who do not hold themselves to the dignity of the community. A regrettable and biased statement, which further exacerbated the lack of trust between the police and the community. In 1975, police identified a prime suspect, a young black man. But despite circumstantial evidence and testimony from a surviving witness, the witness ultimately refused to testify in court. This forced the district attorney's office to drop the prosecution. Like the Texarkana Phantom, the doodler vanished in 1975. He might have moved elsewhere, been arrested for another crime, or simply stopped. But the case remains one of San Francisco's most famous cold cases. The doodler's story is a painful reminder. When personal fear meets societal stigma, it creates a perfect cover for crime to flourish. The deaths of these victims were not only the work of one killer, but the tragedy of a community forced to live in shadow and silence. Story 9. The Captor's Promise. In May 1977, Colleen Stan, a 20-year-old girl, was hitchhiking along a highway in California to visit friends. She made the fatal mistake of accepting a ride from Cameron Hooker and his wife, Janice Hooker. It was the moment of fate that plunged Colleen into a 7-year nightmare. This episode will focus on the extreme psychological and physical control that Cameron Hooker imposed on Colleen. Immediately after the abduction, Cameron used physical and mental torture techniques, along with a fabricated slavery contract, to completely dominate his victim. The most chilling detail in this case is the box, a secluded, narrow wooden box where Cameron imprisoned Colleen for many hours each day. She was kept in darkness, cramped space, completely isolated from the outside world. Cameron's cruelty lay not only in his actions, but also in his words. He convinced Colleen that he was a member of a large, secret organization called the Company. Cameron threatened that if she tried to escape, the Company would brutally murder both her and her family. This narrative bound Colleen with an invisible psychological leash, making her so terrified that she obeyed Cameron. What makes this story even more complex and horrible is the role of Janice Hooker, Cameron's wife. Janice not only knew about her husband's crimes, but also participated in Colleen's imprisonment and torture. However, over time, Janice's conscience began to gnaw at her. She witnessed her husband's brutality and Colleen's deterioration. After about 4 years of captivity in the box, Cameron altered his treatment of Colleen, allowing her to live in the house and even introducing her to friends and family as his personal slave, or a nanny. Astonishingly, under Cameron's extreme psychological control, Colleen did not immediately escape, even when opportunities arose. She still believed in the threat of the Company and the false promises of her captor. The turning point of this episode came in 1984. Janice Hooker, unable to bear it any longer, approached Colleen and confessed the truth. Janice pledged to help Colleen escape and provide information to the police. Janice's cooperation, stemming from fear of her own husband and guilt, brought freedom to Colleen. With Janice's help, Colleen escaped, and the police launched an investigation. The testimonies of both Colleen and Janice exposed the full truth about the terrifying years in the box. The case of Colleen Stan is a heartbreaking story of how a captor can completely control a victim's will through a combination of violence and psychological manipulation. It is a chilling testament to the human capacity for endurance against unimaginable cruelty, and the moment human conscience, Janice's, became a rare light in the darkness. Story 10. The Psycho Doctor Killer. Our final story takes place within the highest echelons of academia and medicine, where intelligence is supposed to be synonymous with ethics. Dr. Robert Ferrante was a renowned and respected neuroscientist at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, doing significant research on ALS. His wife, Dr. Autumn Klein, was also a successful neurologist. They had an enviable life, with glittering careers and a happy small family. But like many stories in this series, the perfect facade concealed cracks and jealousy. In 2013, Dr. Autumn Klein suddenly collapsed at home and died a few days later. The sudden and mysterious death of an otherwise healthy woman immediately raised suspicions. Initially, doctors diagnosed a heart issue. However, Dr. Ferrante, the husband, displayed strange behavior and tried to rush his wife's cremation, which further fueled the doubts of her colleagues and family. Investigators decided to perform a comprehensive toxicology test, and the results shocked the medical community. Dr. Autumn Klein died from cyanide poisoning. Cyanide is an extremely potent poison that causes rapid death and is often difficult to detect in the body without specialized testing. The focus of the investigation quickly turned to Dr. Robert Ferrante. This episode will delve into the cunning way Ferrante planned the crime. He was a scientist with a deep understanding of biology and pharmacology, which helped him cover his tracks. Investigators discovered that Ferrante had ordered a large quantity of cyanide, claiming it was for his cellular mitochondria research in his lab. He used his specialized knowledge to find a lethal dose that would be difficult to detect immediately. Ferrante's motive was believed to be jealousy and fear of abandonment. At the time Dr. Klein fell ill, the couple was going through serious marital discord. Ferrante feared losing his wife and their shared assets in a divorce. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence was the detail of how Ferrante tricked his wife into consuming the poison. He gave her an energy drink, claiming it was something to boost her vitality. Suspecting nothing, Dr. Klein drank it just moments before collapsing. The prosecution of Ferrante was a battle between forensic experts and scientists, attempting to prove the intent of a man who understood the poison better than anyone else. Ultimately, the jury was convinced that Ferrante had used his knowledge and position to cold-bloodedly and calculatedly poison his wife. Dr. Robert Ferrante was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The story of Dr. Ferrante serves as a terrifying conclusion to our series. It proves that crime does not discriminate based on social class or education. Sometimes, the most intelligent minds are the most dangerous, utilizing their knowledge for the most heinous acts. The Psycho Doctor Killer ended a brilliant life and promising career due to the base desires of jealousy and greed, leaving behind a haunting question. and we truly ever know the real nature of those closest to us. Thank you for listening to this series. Please like and subscribe to the channel to hear the next series.